so glad you've joined us. My name is Barbara Chatzkel, and I'll be moderating for the evening's forum. This forum is sponsored by the Arizona State University and the Citizens Clean Election Commission. ASU is a nonpartisan organization, and that is, they never support or oppose any candidate or political party. For this reason, the Clean Elections Commission has chosen ASU to conduct its candidate forums in Legislative District 23. The Clean Elections Act is a campaign finance reform measure which was passed by Arizona voters in 1998. Participation as a clean elections candidate is strictly voluntary. The system provides full public funding for qualified candidates who illustrate the support of their constituents by gathering $5 qualifying contributions from registered voters in their legislative district. They must also adhere to contribution and spending limits and may not accept money from special interest groups, and they agree to participate in these forums. This election cycle, the Citizens Clean Election Commission has also invited traditional campaigning candidates to participate. We encourage you as the citizen participants to provide your questions for this forum. You should have received 3x5 cards. I would appreciate it if you would write one question per card. If you just hold it up, somebody will pick them up. And if you need more cards, they're available for you. We screen the questions for clarity, to eliminate duplications or speeches or personal attacks on candidates. There is an independent timekeeper who will see that all candidates have equal time for answers to questions and will notify them when their time is up. We ask you to remain polite to all of the candidates and give them a fair and uninterrupted hearing. No matter how strongly you may agree or disagree with anything being said, this means, and this is hard, no applause, outbursts, or cheers, except when we introduce the candidates. This is especially important as post-captioning services will be made available after the debate for those individuals that are hard of hearing. As such, I will always refer to each candidate by their full name as we go to each question and ask that the candidates speak clearly into their microphones. Also, before we get started, my goodness, before we get started, we ask everyone to please turn off or silence all your cell phones or other electronic devices since we are recording and we don't want to interrupt the candidates. The format for the evening, if you've attended the primary one, is very similar. Each candidate has an opening statement of 3 minutes in length. We will then move to the questions that we've received from you, as well as some other questions we have prepared, and each candidate has 2 minutes to answer each question posed to them. We will then have 3 minutes for closing comments from each candidate. So let's get right to the important stuff. The candidates for this evening running for the Senate are John Kavanaugh, Republican, and Paula Pennypacker, Democrat. Good. I like that. In the order in which candidates will speak is determined alphabetically by last name, and it's going to start at the front of the alphabet and closing statements start at the end of the alphabet. And with 2 candidates, we can make this work very easily. So, Mr. John Kavanaugh, would you please start with the opening remarks for this evening?
Yes, thank you, and thank everybody for attending. I'm State Representative John Kavanaugh. It's been my pleasure to represent this district in the Arizona House of Representatives for the last 8 years. Prior to that, I served 6 years on the town council in Fountain Hills, And I also served 3 years on a town council back east where I lived before I moved here with my family. I've also served on many commissions and civic associations and volunteer groups because public service has always been a large part of my life. I was born and raised in New York City. Educationally, I received a BA degree in sociology from NYU. I went on to get a master's degree in government and politics from St. John's University back in New York City and Queens, and eventually a PhD in criminal justice from Rutgers University. Occupationally, right after graduating from college, I became a police officer. I served for 20 years with the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey Police Department, spent most of my time at the Port Authority bus terminal in the Times Square section of New York City. I came on as a police officer, was promoted to sergeant after 7 or 8 years. Eventually I became a detective sergeant, which is when I retired. I then moved here with my wife, Linda, who I'm very proud of. She's the mayor of Fountain Hills now, and my 2 children, who now, of course, are grown and out on their own. So I moved here. I taught at ASU for a while, criminal justice. I was there part-time for a while, 3 years full-time, and for the last 12 or 13 years, I've been a full-time professor of criminal justice at Scottsdale Community College, where I'm also head of the criminal justice department, and I also founded the forensic science department. Again, I've been the state representative for the last 8 years. All 8 of those years I served on the Appropriations Committee. I was chairman of the Appropriations Committee for 6 years, which I think will come in handy because I was fortunate or unfortunate, as the case may be, to be at the helm of the Appropriations Committee during the last fiscal crisis, where revenue dropped and we had to do a lot of scrambling to keep the state afloat. We solved that problem. A lot of the money's come back, but unfortunately, we now find ourselves facing another economic shortfall next year. In fact, the deficit right now is projected to be $765 million. I think the experience that I had on the Appropriations Committee, especially in dire budget circumstances, can be put to good use in this current crisis. And I hope to be there as the senator for this district to do that and to serve in other ways. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Paula Pennypacker, will you please give us your opening comments?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. My name is Paula Pennypacker, and it's an honor to be here tonight and to address you. I am a wife, mother, and founder and president of Just for Redheads International. Along with my husband, we have created a global brand that now reaches over 2 million redheads worldwide. I am the 6th of 7 children, and I was born and raised in Toledo, Ohio. I have been a citizen politician for over 30 years. My passion has always been fighting for good government, protecting the taxpayer, and weeding out waste and corruption in government. I am running today to be your state senator because I believe what is missing is the voice of we the people down at the Capitol. After all, when did it become acceptable to make decisions that benefit a few and not what's in the best interests of our children, families, and neighborhoods? If Republican lawmakers think our educational system is so great, why are we last? If they believe our child and protection services are great, why did they let happen what happened? If they believe that cutting taxes 24 of the last 25 years has been great, where's the growth? Where's the trickle down? Where's the jobs? Let's face it, we need to stop divisive partisan politics and start to work together so that we can restore an effective working government down at the Capitol and put Arizona back on track to being a leading state in this great nation. Together, we can make a difference. I'm Paula Pennypacker, and I would love to be your voice in the Arizona State Senate. Thank you.
Thank you. And let's have a round of applause for both candidates. Thank you so much. So I have a good number of questions, but please continue to write your questions and they'll be provided to me. What I will do is read the question, and we're going to start with Mr. John Kavanaugh, and 2 minutes, and then moving on to Ms. Paula Pennypacker. The first question is, with limited revenues to provide essential services to Arizonans, What is your position on continuing to fund private prisons?
Well, we have a mixture of public and private prisons. And in times of a fiscal crisis, continuing the funding or staying with the private prisons that we have contracts with makes sense, because private prisons don't cost as much as state-run prisons. This was a large controversy that's been going on for a number of years, and a lot of people are under the impression, based upon a faulty study which our own Department of Corrections would come out with yearly, that it actually costs less for them to do it than private prisons. However, every year they neglected very important information. The cost of constructing the prisons was not built into their model. In addition, they didn't include the cost of the pension benefits, much of which is unfunded, which was not in their model. And when we finally had the nonpartisan Joint Legislative Budget Committee rework those numbers and put in those missing costs that the Corrections Department did not put in, it showed that you actually save money when you do private prisons. So if you want to continue to save money, then we stick with the private prisons for the ones that we have. But again, we do a mixture. We don't use private prisons for maximum security. We use them mostly for medium and minimum. But the nonpartisan JLBC, after they did the figures properly and include all the factors, showed that, frankly, private prisons are cheaper. And for the most part, they aesthetically seem to be a bit better. And I'm not blaming the state prison on that, but the private prisons tend to be newer. They have more advanced architectural designs, so they tend to be better places to house prisoners. At least they don't require quite as much manpower either because of the architectural design. So private prisons save money, and to go away from them would increase the money. That money that we would then have to spend extra would be less money for education and other important services.
Thank you. Ms. Paula Pennypacker.
Thank you very much. In terms of private prisons, I believe that government should not guarantee monies to the private prison industry. And I also think that when private prison building becomes more important than school building, that we as a state have a serious problem. Now, there has been some studies that those cities, or those states rather, are starting to abandon the private prison industry, 9 states to be exact, and I have a note here that even Texas is cutting back on the, in terms of building private prisons because, and he claims the study is faulty. The Arizona Department of Corrections in 2010 showed that there was virtually no savings to be had. So I think that we need to have a detailed study done to see if in fact what he is saying is true and there is a savings to taxpayers. So, and again, unlike my opponent, I do not accept contributions from the private prison industry and will not accept donations from the private prison industry. And we're going to be staying away from special interests and those and corporations that support the private industry. Thank you.
Thank you. We don't do rebuttals on that, so. Okay. Do you think all donations to campaigns should be declared? What do you think of candidates who do not declare them? Mr. John Kavanaugh, please.
Yeah, well, the law is that you have to note all donations. I think if it's under $25, you just aggregate them. But if you're talking about the dark money, if you're talking about situations where individuals are allowed to make contributions to private 501c corporations, which then are allowed to spend that money in campaigns, I totally oppose that. In fact, you might call me a victim because in my primary race, I had a number of outside groups that spent a fortune issuing very, very vile attack ads against me. And of course, we saw that at all levels of government. I think that any money spent has to be reported. And I think that's the best way to get these vile hate attack TV commercials and mailers out of the system. Because most people, if they know that their name would be public, that they gave to the group that did this vile behavior, they wouldn't give the money to those groups. And then you wouldn't have our political discourse brought down to the gutter, which is what this type of anonymous money and dark groups do. They bring it to the gutter. So I support full disclosure of campaign contributions.
Good. Ms. Paula Pennypacker, if you ever want me to repeat the question, please let me know.
Go ahead, please.
Do you think all donations to campaigns should be declared? What do you think of candidates who do not?
Absolutely. I believe in full and immediate disclosure. We, the people, have a right to know who is buying or owning our politicians. It's remarkable to hear them now talk against dark money, because when they had an opportunity to serve in the legislature and do something about it, all we heard was crickets. Transparency is key. Dark money is getting us to, or that's why we're seeing the polarization that we're seeing in the American political system. So yes, I totally support full and immediate disclosure.
Okay, thank you. Just a reminder, you do have 2 minutes on questions, so. Would you support legislation that would allow cities to write their own sign ordinances? Mr. John Kavanaugh?
Do I always go first?
Yes.
Every question?
Yeah, I don't flip back and forth. I know. Let me, we'll take a, do I flip? Okay. Ms. Paula Pennypacker, thank you.
That's good.
Absolutely, I do. In fact, I was involved when the city of Scottsdale drafted their ordinance to ban political signs in the public right-of-way, only to have it overturned by our supposed less government politicians down at the state. Now, one will say, oh, it's all about freedom of speech. Well, I don't understand, if that's true, why Fountain Hills doesn't have to have political signs in the public right-of-way, but Scottsdale got their ordinance overturned. We do support free speech, and you could have political signs, yard signs. We just didn't want them cluttering our desert landscape. So in 2010, when I ran for the legislature, I had people say, one of the reasons you lost is because you didn't have signs. And I said, you know what? I was running to be a lawmaker. As a lawmaker, I have to obey the laws, and there was a law in Scottsdale, no signs, political signs in the public right-of-way. But my opponent here just went ahead and disregarded the law and put his political signs wherever he wanted. So yeah, we do have free speech, but it's interesting that I guess only the residents of Scottsdale have free speech, but in Fountain Hills, they don't.
Well,
Mr. John Kavanaugh.
with all due respect to Ms. Pennypacker, she's totally wrong. There's one law for the entire state. The town of Fountain Hills does not have a sign ordinance that says you can't do signs. That's unconstitutional. Any candidate can put a sign in Fountain Hills if they want to. You can put a sign in Fountain Hills if you want to. So there is no different law. It's all the same. It's a standardized state sign law. And the idea about some people, well, the some people who say you have to do this are the courts. This is a First Amendment issue. You have businesses, especially realtors, that put all sorts of signs up about open houses on the streets. You have stores that put signs and A-frames in front of their stores. This is a very common occurrence. And the courts very simply said to a legal challenge, and I didn't put the challenge in, but the court said that you cannot say businesses, yes, you can put signs up, and political campaigns, you cannot put signs up. They said you have to treat everybody equally. And most jurisdictions, including Scottsdale, decided not to tell realtors and businesses and stores that they can no longer put signs on the street or in the road or in front of their stores. It's simply a matter of treating everybody fairly. That's what the First Amendment is all about. And my primary job, well, one of my primary jobs at the legislature, is to make sure that we obey the law, particularly the Bill of Rights, and that's the First Amendment. Do I like political signs all over the place? I don't really like them. I'd love to save money and not have political signs. As an incumbent, it would probably help me because I have name recognition. But that doesn't trump the Constitution. So you're wrong when you say that Fountain Hills bans them. They have a law. It's the same law. Candidates just don't put their signs up in Fountain Hills for whatever reason. And sometimes they do. So this is the First Amendment, not me. I can't trump your rights, even if I'm not thrilled with the result. Thank you.
And thank you to the person for correcting me. I will rotate them. I apologize. Will you balance the budget without taking funds from schools, infrastructure, economic development, parks, and other cultural and education items? If so, how?
Well, I don't think we can balance the budget without doing some cuts. I think you will see a net increase in school spending because we just have a lawsuit that was settled that gives additional $317 million to K-12 education. So they will be getting a substantial boost. Admittedly, there is currently an appeal, but that appeal deals with not whether they get the $317 million or not, but what is the actual amount. There's a dispute over the way you calculate that. But regardless of the outcome, there will be a large amount of money going to K-12 education. So there will be no cuts. There will be increased money for K-12 education. I don't think you'll see any cuts in Child Protective Services. That was an agency that we just put a whole lot of money into because it had a long history, not just under the current governor, but going back through Governor Napolitano. In fact, all CPS agencies have a lot of serious problems nationwide, even New York City does. We're trying to get straightened out. We put a lot of money and new personnel into that. You won't see cuts there. But beyond that, I think you're going to see cuts in other areas because both gubernatorial candidates, the Republican and the Democrat, have flat out said that they will not raise taxes. And if you're not, which I agree with, but if you're not raising taxes, then the only way you're going to close a projected $765 million budget deficit next year is by doing cuts. Not to K-12, they'll have an increase. But beyond that, I think you'll see cuts in other areas, a lot of other areas. It's inevitable. It's the math.
Thank you. Ms. Paula Pennypacker.
Would you please repeat the question?
Will you balance the budget without taking funds from schools, infrastructure, economic development, parks, and other cultural and educational budget items? And how would you do that?
Absolutely. I spoke about this in 2010. I'm still speaking about it. We need to modernize our tax code. How do we do that? We do that by lowering and broadening. Let's start with just the consumption tax for everyone, especially for we small business owners. We small business owners are 80% of the new economy, and we're paying almost a 10% consumption tax, while some large corporations are paying almost zero. I will not, just like Fred Duvall has said, I will not support a tax increase. I would vote against a tax increase because we can get the extra revenue we need to operate our government and build a 21st century educational system by simply lowering and broadening the consumption tax and closing tax loopholes. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever to tax we small business people while large corporations pay less taxes. That's the big elephant in the room. We have to address the revenue shortfall, and until we do that, you're going to continue, as my opponent just said, more cuts, and operating a government on revenues that 2007, 2008 revenues. And as a small business owner, I can tell you that year after year, all my expenses have gone up and up and up and up. And I can assure you, so has the cost of operating our government. That is why we need to lower and broaden the tax base for everyone.
Thank you. Just a reminder to those in the audience, if you have any questions, please fill out your index card, hold it up, somebody will take it, because we want to make sure that we answer your questions tonight. So, next question is, what are your feelings on term limits and possible overall term limits? Mr. John Kavanaugh.
I think term limits are a mistake because we already have them. In the legislature, you have term limits every 2 years. If the voters don't like what you're doing, they vote you out. That's term limits. The current situation is one where if the voters like what somebody is doing after 8 years, then they can no longer vote for that person. And after the 8 years, that person may have become extremely experienced, may have built a lot of friendships across the aisle. So it makes no sense. I think the voters are intelligent enough and smart enough to be able to judge the candidates every 2 years. So for some candidates, there'll be 2-year term limits. For others, they'll go indefinitely if they do a good job. A lot of people think we need term limits because they think the Arizona legislature is like Congress, where once you're in a few terms and you get seniority, you become a god, you're locked in stone. That's not the way it is at the Arizona legislature. Seniority does not give you that much great power there. In fact, most members in their second term wind up as committee chairpersons. And in the Arizona legislature, a chairman can't stop a bill. There are so many ways to get bills around chairmen with various floor maneuvers. It's nothing like Congress, and all term limits do is take people who are experienced, who can work across the aisle and have legislative history, and throw them out, and then you wind up with lobbyists and staff members having an exorbitant large amount of power, which is not right because nobody elected them.
Ms. Paula Pennypacker, would you like
Just term limits. I used to be a huge advocate for term limits, but I'm not anymore. I think that it's easy to blame the current state of the American political process and the state of Arizona's politics on not having term limits or on dark money, but when in truth, we need to all look in the mirror, and this is exactly what happens when people turn away from their government. And I get it. People don't think that state government affects their day-to-day life. But I'm hoping, if nothing else in this campaign, to get people to turn back to their government. Government is supposed to be a participatory sport, excuse me, not a spectator sport. So, you know, it's would be a Band-Aid on a very serious problem. So I'm not a huge advocate of term limits anymore.
Okay, thank you. The majority of Arizona citizens now consider members of the LGBT community to deserve being treated as any other citizen. What will you do to assure that they are treated fairly and equally? Ms. Paula Pennypacker.
Well, that's one of the main reasons why I'm running. I'm sick of being a punchline on Comedy Central, and here, when 1062 came about, here we go again, politicians deciding, you know, who businesses can discriminate against. I'm totally opposed to it. Every person in this country and state deserves the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So I would oppose any such legislation. I would never even think to bring forward any such legislation that does not provide equality for everyone.
Mr. John Kavanaugh.
Thank you. And again, 1062 was basically an attempt to do some tweaks to the Federal Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which was passed by near majorities of both houses of Congress in the 1990s and signed by Bill Clinton, supported by the ACLU and even groups on the right. That law was passed because governments were penalizing people for expressing their religious beliefs. The particular cases that brought that bill to light was were Native Americans being arrested for using peyote in their religious ceremonies. Everybody thought that that was outrageous, that people could be penalized for their religion. They passed that Restoration Act. You had something different happen in Phoenix recently, where they passed a civil rights law involving LGBT. What they did was they put in the law that if a person felt that they were denied service, even to the point where it could be a transgendered person going into a public shower of the opposite sex or a dressing room, that the individual could sue the business. So we simply extended the protections that the federal law had, which the state also passed, to also cover lawsuits, because if you can use the state courts to sue somebody, that's not much different than the federal government or the state government fining you. And we also made it harder to discriminate based upon that law by stating that the religious belief that a person claims is the reason why they can't serve and provide whatever to a person has to not be any religious belief, it has to be a substantial religious belief. And the Hobby Lobby case pretty much affirmed that principle. So I don't want to have anybody discriminated against, but I don't want people who have sincere, true religious beliefs not being forced to violate them because they're being sued or harassed by somebody. So I think there's a reasonable medium, and I think that federal law kind of reached that.
Thank you. Okay. Arizona's unemployment rate remains around 7% the full year and has been slow to recover from the Great Recession. What do you propose to do to improve the job climate in our state? Mr. John Kavanaugh.
Yes. Well, we've done a number of things. We've tried to reduce taxes so that businesses would have more money to invest and we could attract more businesses. We've done an awful lot of deregulation because, again, there's a lot of unnecessary regulation that hampers businesses. But ultimately, the problems that we have in terms of job growth are the result of Washington policies, which quite frankly have a lot of businesses scared stiff and afraid to invest money. Also, Washington imposing extremely high extra cost on businesses, like through the Affordable Health Care Act. Businesses actually were turning people who were full-time into part-timers because of the provisions of that Health Care Act that would cost them a lot of cash. And so the way to basically do this is, of course, to get some change in Washington so that you have a administration that's a lot more friendly to business and doesn't impose excessive regulation or excessive economic burden. The second reason why we have problems is the nature of the recession was because of ridiculous abuses in the housing markets. And this, of course, we can lay the blame on not just the Democrats, but the Republicans also. Both Republicans and Democrats for years wound up making it ridiculously easy for people to get mortgages, people who never should have been given mortgages because they just didn't have the money or the income or the economic history to do them. But Republicans love to claim that this is a great country, everyone can afford a house, and Democrats love the fact that everybody was getting homes. And then, of course, the whole bubble burst. And Arizona was particularly hard hit by this because construction was such a big part of our industry. And that's one reason why it's hard to have a job it's harder in Arizona to have a job come back because we have this major glut of houses, which is contributing to unemployment. And you won't see much construction going on because you have empty houses that people will eventually buy and they can't be built. So it's a total mess, partially Washington's fault. We do our best in terms of keeping taxes low and regulation low at the state level, and we'll continue to try to do that.
Thank you. Ms. Paula Pennypacker, would you like to read?
Nope, I'm good. Okay, as we just discussed with the previous question, I would not support any of the bills that have made Arizona laughingstock and has basically destroyed our brand, such as SB 1070 and 1062. We can start by working on messaging and getting people to get interested in Arizona as opposed to pulling out of Arizona. As we discussed earlier, I would also support a lower and broader and fair tax base. We need tax reform. That would help bring in a lot of small businesses, maybe not the huge corporations, but again, we small business owners are the backbone of the new economy. We provide up to 80% of the new jobs that we're talking about that we need to bring here to Arizona. So lowering and broadening and making the tax base more fair, closing tax loopholes, as I've discussed, and the other big elephant in the room is our absolutely deplorable educational system. As an employer in Arizona, I have been interviewing what's been coming out of our high schools, and it's not a very pretty sight. I'm talking about entry-level jobs for shipping, and we have definitely got to get higher standards and invest in our schools and our educational system.
Very good. I do have some follow-up questions. The first follow-up is, would you support 1062 today? Ms. Paula Pennypacker.
No.
Would you like the rest of your 2 minutes?
No.
Okay. Mr. John Kavanaugh.
I think the supporters of 1062 need to do what the supporters of its base bill, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, did back in the 90s when they got that passed by almost every Republican and every Democrat and signed by President Clinton. The concept of protecting people from persecution, be it government prosecution or private lawsuits, when they have a sincere religious belief, it was a good thing then and it's a good thing now. I think the people who pushed this bill should have reached out to the other side, should have worked out the language, and should have told them it is not our intention to allow some waiter to say to somebody who they may think is gay, I don't serve gays. That's not what the Religious Freedom Restoration Act allows. That's not what 1062 would allow. We were talking, and that law talks about protecting somebody from doing something which violates their religious belief when it's a sincerely held religious belief and the government has no other way to accomplish the end that it's trying to accomplish. So we're talking about the egregious violation of religious belief. And the Supreme Court just said it's okay to do that in the Hobby Lobby case. So I think there was a lot of problems with both sides getting together and coming to an agreement. I think it was a public relations nightmare in the media. And part of that was fueled by those who opposed it, who purposely misrepresented it in order to get people to vote against it, but at the same time just made a bad name for Arizona. So I think we can still protect religious freedom in this country, and I think we can do it in a bipartisan way, Democrat, liberal, libertarian, conservative, moderate, liberal. Religious freedom is an important thing, and we can balance that with people's civil rights.
Thank you. Another follow-up question on the budget cuts. The Highway User Revenue Fund, that's our gas tax, has been swept for $100 million annually for more than a decade. Do you support continuing this practice? And if so, how will we maintain the ability to grow and protect our highway infrastructure? Mr. John Kavanaugh.
Yes. Well, I don't believe we'll be sweeping HERF anymore. In fact, I think the only money we're taking now from HERF is actually allowed, and that's to help fund the Highway Patrol, which funds the highway, which was part of the process. I don't believe we're doing the motor vehicle department funding from that. But no, I agree. We need to do some road construction, especially road maintenance, and I don't see any need to do that.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Paula Pennypacker.
Yes, absolutely. I would love to go on the record to answer that question. I strongly oppose fund sweeps as a way to balance our budget. That goes, I think doing that is just as bad as my opponent supporting selling our capital assets, only to have taxpayers have to lease them back, costing us millions and millions of dollars. Also, they can go in front of the electorate and say, I balance the budget, which, by the way, constitutionally, they have to balance the budget without raising your taxes. Some other areas besides fund sweeps where they've wasted millions of taxpayer money, taxpayer dollars, is they're borrowing money to pay to balance the budget, and then we as the taxpayers have to pay interest on that debt. So there's no savings in there, and it's all a matter of ideology. They want to be able to go in front of their base, say, look what we've done, we balanced the budget, regardless if it was on the backs of taxpayers, regardless if it was on the backs of our school children, regardless if it was on the backs of Child and Protection Services or for the highway fund sweeps. No, we need to do some serious discussion down at the state capitol about how we're going to modernize our tax code so we can move this state forward into the 21st century.
Thank you. Another follow-on question, and this is about term limits. What are your feelings about the term limits and the practice that they are you change houses to restart them? And sorry for the, but Mr. John Kavanaugh.
Right,
No, actually, no, that goes Ms. Paula Pennypacker.
I thought we have,
This is the follow-on question was the choice about an absolute term limit not being able to, as opposed to not changing houses for restarting term limits.
you mean carpet bagging? Is that what the person is referring to, that a legislator would carpet bag perhaps?
I don't know.
You know, what's it?
No,
What's that?
no.
Oh, going back and forth. There's serious issues with that whole concept, and we've got to address those, absolutely. But on balance, I do not support term limits, because if you're good, you should stay in office. If you're bad, the people should vote you out. People need to start paying attention to their government.
Mr. John Kavanaugh.
Yeah, I agree with Paula. I don't think term limits are a good idea, so
Okay,
that's it.
thank you. Arizona lost the Tesla battery plant that would have employed 5,000 people because our government passed a law against direct car sales, as Tesla does do their sales. Do you think the Arizona car dealers lobby should have denied buyers the right to buy a car directly?
Who's first?
You are, Mr. John
Okay.
Kavanaugh.
I do, because I'm the person who sponsored the bill that would have allowed Tesla to directly sell their cars from their manufacturing stores. I saw a Tesla car. I was amazed at how quiet and powerful it was. And I was at the mall here in Scottsdale, Fashion Square, and they have a little store there, and I discovered that you can't buy a Tesla car. I said, why can't you buy a Tesla car here? He said, because the law says you can't do that. And I said, I don't like that law. People should be able to buy from a dealer. And I wrote a bill. I said that dealers can. Now, the car people came in and they said that there's a problem, that you do have this kind of semi-monopoly because they need to protect car dealerships from manufacturers opening up dealerships right next to existing dealerships and shutting them down. And I said, well, that's a good point. You invest all that money, and then the company comes in and they open up the same dealership 2 blocks away to bankrupt you. I got a problem with that too. But I said, you know what? My bill doesn't say that. My bill simply says that you can't that a manufacturer can do their own as long as it's not within like 15 miles or whatever I put down of an existing Tesla dealership. So I got around that. There was no problem to protect dealerships. And unfortunately, in the end, I couldn't get my bill heard in the Commerce Committee. We had a big meeting in my office. The committee chair was there. They brought in lawyers from Detroit, and I had the Tesla representative who I was working with, but we could not convince that committee chair, Transportation Committee chair, to hear the bill, and the Tesla bill died. But it was my bill to allow those sales, in spite of what some people may think.
Thank you. Ms. Paula Pennypacker.
Okay, I'm not really up to speed on the issue, but it sounds to me like if we're going to continue with the theory that competition is good, Tesla should be able to sell their cars when and where they want to sell their cars. I don't know, it sounds to me on the surface like a payback from the Automobile Dealers Association to Kavanaugh.
I supported the Tesla
okay.
bill. I was the sponsor. What are you talking about?
We're not having rebuttals, so I apologize for.
I know, but it was a vile accusation.
Yeah.
Okay.
You still have time, Ms.
I'm good.
Okay. Let's go with a softball question. What is your opinion of Governor Brewer's decision last year to expand Medicaid in Arizona? Mr. John Kavanaugh.
No, I opposed.
Go ahead.
Okay. I opposed it. It's part of Obamacare, and I don't support Obamacare, and it's unaffordable. The cost of Obamacare is outrageous. The only way they got the expansion of the state is for the federal government to pick up almost all of the cost in the beginning, but eventually they'll be dropping that cost, and it will fall upon the state, and it will bankrupt us. But even if it never fell upon us, we're also federal taxpayers. And the federal debt is up to $17 trillion, even above that now. Federal government can't afford this type of ridiculous spending, and the state government can't afford it. And there are better ways to get health insurance to people. There are better ways to deal with people who have existing conditions that can't get coverage. You know, there's tort reform, there's allowing for greater competition between insurance companies, between states. There's regulations concerning pre-existing conditions that you can take care of. You don't have to basically take over a big chunk of one of the U.S.'s major industries and bankrupt the federal government in so doing, and then unethically and immorally passing this debt on to our children, because those are the people who will be trying to pay off this ridiculous debt that we've been racking up in the last 5-6 years.
Thank you. Ms. Paula Pennypacker.
I absolutely 100% support Governor Brewer's proposal to expand Medicaid. That said, that's one of the major reasons why I left the GOP after 30 years, because I did not want to be a part of a party that actually cheers for people not to have affordable health care. My story is that when my husband was tragically diagnosed with brain cancer, a diagnosis that came out of nowhere, I went up and spoke to a Tea Party gathering and wanted to explain to them why I was supporting the Affordable Care Act. And when I asked the audience members, you know, what happens to people who don't have a small business to fall back on like we do, or have health insurance, or have a savings, what happens to those people when they're confronted with a totally random, tragic diagnosis? And someone in the back of the room said, "Too bad." I looked at Ray and I said, you know what, Ray, I don't want to belong to a party who feels that way. I want to work on making the Affordable Care Act affordable. People have a right to have access to affordable health care. So yes, I supported Jan Brewer 100%. And is this law perfect? No, but we can do it. This is the 21st century. We can figure out how to deliver health care to all Americans without bankrupting the country. I would like to think we're savvy enough and high-tech enough that we can figure this out and not give in to the fear-mongering and the scare tactics from the far right that this is going to bankrupt the entire country. Let's put our heads together and have a deliberate, meaningful conversation between conservatives and progressives and figure this out. I think it's a noble, worthwhile cause, and something I want to put my energy into is figuring out how to have affordable health care for all.
Thank you. Just a reminder to the audience, we are moving toward the end of the questions that we have. So if there are any questions that you want to have included, please get them up here. I have a couple more to go through. Thank you so much. For the candidates, what are your thoughts on the current pension system for the state of Arizona workers? Ms. Paula Pennypacker.
I believe that reform is necessary for the pension system. I do not buy into the scare tactics of that is being put out there by the Goldwater Institute and ALEC. I believe that 401ks are not the panacea that people think that they can be in terms of reforming our system to the 401k system. States that have done it have now abandoned it. There's exorbitant upfront costs that need to be addressed. So this is a huge issue for the state, and I think that doing this just for the public employees and then isolating out the firefighters and the police officers is, again, duplicitous. We need to reform the entire system so that our public employees have a great and decent pension system to retire on.
Thank you. Mr. John Kavanaugh.
Thank you. I spent years trying to save the defined benefit system that public employees currently have. I sponsored bills, I tried to get amendments onto bills to get reasonable reforms to stop outrageous abuses, especially involving spiking. And year after year, those efforts were beaten down and were rejected, to the point where I said, I don't see how you can reform this current system. And that's why when there was a vote to eliminate the elected officials' pension system, I voted for it very reluctantly. And I see the same thing happening for the other pension systems unless the recipients agree to reform. But they just won't agree to reform. And I think this is tragic. I see so many people who I grew up with, so many people who I know, who don't have defined benefit systems, who have 401ks, who are grossly underfunded. I don't know what these people are going to do when they try to retire. And that's why I like defined benefit systems. But you can't insist on the taxpayer having to pay the ridiculous costs that all of the abuses occur. And for some reason, you can't get the reforms in. I'd still like to see them saved, but I'm very pessimistic. And it's not fair for the taxpayers to bear the risk. If I had my way, we'd have a very simple defined benefit public system. It would be based only on your base pay. No more of all this spiking, no more of all these, your cell phone allowances that happen in Phoenix. It's a disgrace. And I think the people are alarmed at this, and what happens in the Phoenix election, I think, will be a sign, an omen for what's going to happen in the future. And it'll be very interesting to see. I'd love to see the defined benefit stay, but for some reason we can't get rid of the abuses, and it's not fair to burden taxpayers, especially those who have underfunded 401ks that have their own future to worry about, to make them pay for these platinum programs.
And I do want to go on the record of opposing pension spiking as well. I think that's a reform that definitely the time has come.
Okay. Are we done on that question? Yes. Okay. How should lawmakers decide on laws that involve religious views? Ms. Paula Pennypacker.
They shouldn't. It shouldn't even be involved in the process. As discussed with some of these questions, we have bigger fish to fry. I believe in the separation of church and state. That was put in place for a very good reason. And for that, I think religion has no place in the body politic, and that we need to focus on jobs, jobs, and jobs.
Okay. Mr. John Kavanaugh.
Thank you. Well, I think lawmakers look to the First Amendment and hundreds and hundreds of years of court cases that have formed around that. And religion does have a part in government. I mean, we open government meetings with prayer. Much of our law, much of our society is based upon religious ethics. But of course, we don't establish religions. We don't fund religions. Those are violations of the First Amendment. So do we have something to look to? Yeah, absolutely. We look at the First Amendment, and what religious involvement is allowed, we permit, because it's a very positive influence. But what violates the First Amendment, we don't allow. It's pretty simple. And if we don't do it, the courts make sure we do.
Thank you. A follow-up question for Mr. John Kavanaugh and then Ms. Paula Pennypacker. Do either of you receive a pension?
Yes, I do. As I said before, I was a police officer for 20 years, Port Authority of New York, Jersey Police Department, and they had a pension system.
Ms. Paula Pennypacker.
And yeah, unlike my opponent who receives, I believe, 3 public pensions, I receive 0.
Okay. Thank you. Do you support the practice of committee chairs having the power to hold bills denying a hearing. Why or why not? Ms. Paula Pennypacker.
I think the arrogance of that system is absolutely stunning. Again, I cannot just point the finger at the legislature. This, again, is a very serious symptom of what happens when we turn our eyes away from our government. The arrogance of one-party rule is absolutely stunning, so that they can hold bills to their liking. They can just disregard bills if they don't want to. The number one thing that we can do this election, and I see it happening, it's changing as sure as that hot air out there is changing, we need to balance out our state government so that all voices are heard down in the Capitol. And I can assure you, if elected and honored to serve, I will be the senator for all the people, not just the ideological radical base that my opponent is supported by.
Thank you. Mr. John Kavanaugh.
Okay, and I'm going to let that kind of attack go by. Name calling is ridiculous and doesn't help the process at all. You can't allow every bill that's filed to be heard. We'd be in session 15 months out of the year. And in fact, you'd have people filing bills just to get a bully pulpit to argue things. The current system simply says that all bills can't be heard because you want to give bills a good hearing. You want to have a hearing where you can allow people to testify. Right? If you every bill has to be heard, everybody would get 3 seconds at the podium to give public comment at a hearing. You just can't do it. Nobody does that. That's a pipe dream.
Okay, thank you. What's the most serious challenge facing Arizona as we go forward? Mr. John Kavanaugh.
Well, right now, the economy. We thought we had tamed that beast, but now we see ourselves facing a $765 million shortfall when we come back in January. And the recovery is anemic, so we're going to have considerable problems going into the future. And you have to have answers, and these answers are going to involve doing cuts to programs. It's going to involve looking around to see if we can find some funds that have reaccumulated, because not all of these funds are stolen money. A lot of these are government accounts that simply have collected too much money. Now, I'm not talking about HERF now, but I'm talking about other agencies that have funds. You know, there are a lot of tools that we use to get by the budget crisis without decimating our government and laying off half our employees. And to say that you won't use any of these tools, you wouldn't take any funds out of anywhere, even if they're funds that are perfectly legitimate to take, that you would not do a tax increase, even though you say you're going to lower the base, broaden the base and lower the rate, but you're not going to raise taxes. Well, you know, if you're going to broaden the base and lower the rate, and you're not raising taxes, that's revenue neutral. So you know what? You got $765 million hole you're going to have to fill in if you get elected. You ruled out cuts, you ruled out fund sweeps, you ruled out borrowing. What are you going to do? Print your own money? That can't be done.
Ms. Paula Pennypacker.
Lowering, a lot of people would disagree with you that lowering and broadening the base is raising taxes. That is a much fairer tax policy than what we're seeing in terms of we small business owners paying more taxes than my large, giant corporate fellow companies. So that said, to answer the question again, please, was?
What do you see as the
the biggest problem?
Yeah.
I gotcha. So anyway, as we discussed, addressing the revenue shortfall is the big elephant in the room. That will be my number one priority when we go down there in education. But I think that the larger question here is we need to restore balance to our government. I don't care what party is in control. When you have one party control, whether it be a state, county, city, country, you open the door for corruption. Absolute power corrupts. When I was a citizen politician in Toledo, Ohio, I ran as a Republican in a sea of Democrats. If I wanted to get elected, I would have just been a Democrat. But I ran as a Republican because I totally believe that good government demands balance. And here I am in the same situation. If I was a political opportunist doing this just to get elected to the state Senate, I certainly would have re-registered as a Democrat after 30 years as a Republican in my district. I did it because we need to restore balance down at the state government. My campaign is attracting Democrats, independents, and moderate Republicans. And that's how we're going to go down there and address what I think to be the largest problem facing the state, and that is a totally out of balance government, one-party rule.
Thank you. Thank you to both candidates for answering the questions, sort of coming at them. We're going to now move to our closing statements for this evening. Ms. Paula Pennypacker, will you please give us your remarks?
Absolutely. This election is about the future of Arizona, the failures of her current leadership, and the need to restore sanity down at the state capitol. Voters need to decide if they want more of the same or if we can do better. Let's take a moment to consider what more of the same means. Education. If my opponent's education policies are so good, then why do Arizona schools rank at the bottom in nearly almost all the important ratings? Even the U.S. Chamber of Commerce rates Arizona academics a D. That's D as in David. He sets the budget, so it's obvious that a mediocre educational system is good enough for Arizona's children. It's not good enough for me. The economy. When my opponent joined the legislature in Arizona, we were entering the Great Recession. The state was losing jobs rapidly, and a record number of Arizonans were losing their homes. So ask yourself, if his economic policies are so great, then why are economists predicting we're a year or two away from recovery, 5 years after it ended? He cut taxes every year with promises of attracting investment and creating jobs, so where are they? Why are 17% more of the people leaving Arizona than moving in? Where's the larger tax base? Nowhere. Why? Because what he's selling, no one is actually buying. If my opponent worked for the private sector and promised market share and sales growth, yet delivered the polar opposite, who thinks he would still have his job? Maybe that's why you work for the government. You're harder to fire. Small government. This is my favorite. I loved writing this. My opponent loves to talk about big government intruding in people's lives. He doesn't want government telling you what you can do on your property, how to run your business, what schools to send your children, what guns you can own, or even what your health care would be. I get it, but here's the difference between us. He thinks it's just peachy for government to deny women health care choices, dictate who individuals can marry, decide what people businesses can deny services from, and require them to show their birth certificate when attending a public bathroom. That's not less government. That's more an intrusive government. I have a problem with that, and I know that you do too. As voters, you have a choice to make. You can elect someone who has built a successful global company and knows firsthand how business and government needs to work together, or you can elect someone who has a record of making business conditions worse, shrinking markets, and damaging Arizona's brand. You can elect someone who is known by Republicans, independents, Democrats, and customers as someone who will listen to them and make intelligent and informed decisions, or you can elect someone whose reputation is ignoring constituents, gleefully insults them to make himself feel superior, and lets cardiology decide what is best for you and me.
All right.
Please, hold applause. Okay. Thank you so much. Mr. John Kavanaugh, your closing remarks, please.
Thank you. And mine will be remarks, not a rant attacking my opponent, which I don't think is proper. We spoke a lot about my background, my experience in my opening statements, and I think you've heard our discussion on policy matters. And I think you can compare us, especially on the budget, where my opponent believes that she cannot raise taxes, she can manipulate the rate and the base, but not bring in any more money because she's not raising taxes, and fill a $765 million budget deficit, even though she's sworn off cuts, fund sweeps, and borrowing. The math makes no sense whatsoever, and you don't have to be a politician or a mathematician or have a PhD in government to do that. It's just smoke and mirrors. But let me talk about something we haven't spoken about, and that's constituent services, because I try to be responsive to my constituents. Early in my career, people complained that they were going to town council meetings and the council people refused to answer questions claiming that it would be a violation of the open meeting law because they were going to vote on this thing, and they wouldn't talk outside of the meeting. Well, that was a misinterpretation of the law. I changed that law, I wrote a bill, we passed that bill, and now they can't hide behind the open meeting law. They have to tell you what they're doing. When a co-ed in Scottsdale was raped by an illegal alien who worked at the school, I said, how could this happen? These people are fingerprint checked. Didn't they know this person was here illegally? I discovered there was a loophole in the law that said that contracted employees don't have to be fingerprint checked to make sure that they're not criminals or rapists. I changed that law. Now everybody who works in schools gets fingerprint checks to protect your children. A constituent in Fountain Hills came to me and said she wanted to open up a small baking business in her home and sell to stores to make extra cash. She was denied by the county health department, who claimed people will die in the streets as unhygienic. I researched it. And it wasn't anti-hygienic. I passed a bill that allows non-hazardous baked goods and candies to be manufactured in people's homes with certain restrictions. 3,000 people have that license now, many of them disabled. Home cottage industries, they make a little money and get a whole lot of self-respect for themselves. That's constituent services. Following the tragic shooting in Tucson, I discovered in reviewing the laws that police officers in this state, because of a quirk in the law, can't take somebody who's acting irrationally and violent based upon the statement of witnesses. They had to view it themselves. I changed that law so cops can now take people who are mentally ill and dangerous into custody, even if they don't get there when the person's doing the act. And when a constituent came to me and said he was being harassed in court by a relative who wanted to get back at him, it was costing him a fortune in legal fees, I got together with the courts and we drafted a bill that prevented that behavior, which is called vexatious litigation. That law will take effect shortly and protect all of you from harassment by people trying to sue you unjustly.
To the candidates, thank you for being mostly compliant. And I really appreciate you for participating. And to you in the audience, we thank you who took the time to come and inform yourselves before voting. We encourage you to find out more about clean elections and the candidates running for office by visiting the cleanelections.gov website. A video of this forum, as well as the other clean election forums, will be posted on that site within 72 hours of tonight's event. Also, we encourage you to complete the survey you received when you arrived and return it to the registration table. Thank you all for coming, and I'd like a round of applause for our two candidates. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming tonight.